Welcome everybody. I'm Brian Jones, and this is a new you, and it's my little portion of the social media world out there. I'm glad that we can all come together and have a space to, take up some topics that are hopefully relevant to everyone and your spiritual journey mainly. So I'm seeing people are starting to join in here, so I'm going to switch over to my chat screen. And if you'd like, please put your name and where you're tuning in from in the chat. I'd love to know that. That would be great. So anyway, this topic is a really big one. The topic's going to be loneliness. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And I think this is something that all of us can relate to, and all of us have experienced a sense of loneliness at some point in our life. And we know, how that is not such a great feeling, when you feel just you don't have anywhere to turn. So I'm going to get into that in a bit, but let's see who's joining in here. Balatir, good morning. Oh, Balakrishnan. Okay, great. Nice to know you're there. Ajay Kumar from Kerala. Oh, from Kerala. I've been all over India, from north to south, but Kerala is the one place I have not yet been. And everyone tells me just how beautiful it is, and that someday I really need to go there, and I hope I get a chance to do that. So nice to know that you're there. So, okay, so I'm going to dive into the topic here today, and I'm going to put it in a few different contexts. So I found something on the internet, and I would like to first read this. Oh, hey, Ellie, hi, good morning, and Murugasan, welcome. Great. So I'm going to start by reading something about loneliness, and this is from a website from the UK called Mind. It's mind.org.uk. And here's what it says about loneliness. It says, we all feel lonely from time to time. Feelings of loneliness are personal, so everyone's experience of loneliness will be different. One common description of loneliness is the feeling we get when our need for rewarding social contact and relationships is not met. But loneliness is not always the same as being alone. You may choose to be alone and live happily without much contact with other people, while others may find this to be a lonely experience. Or you may have lots of social contact or be in a relationship or part of a family and still feel lonely, especially if you don't feel understood or cared for by the people around you. And then they have a quote here. One thing I've learned is the difference between feeling alone and feeling lonely, and how you can feel lonely in a crowd full of people, but quite peaceful and content when alone. All right. Now, many of you know that I'm a writer on Quora, and over the past 7 years or so that I've been writing there, I interact with a lot of people. A lot of people get in touch with me, and it sort of was an eye-opener for me that so many young people would get in touch with me and express the fact that they feel that they're going through an awakening, a spiritual awakening. But how that's manifesting for them is that they're feeling completely alone or lonely. They're feeling totally lonely, and they're feeling completely misunderstood. They have no idea what's happening to them. Suddenly their life and the world as, they have known it seems to had a shift, an internal shift in themselves. And now it's all different. And this is what we would call an awakening process. And it's very common. I mean, I'm surprised we don't hear more about this awakening process because it's going on all over the world. And I hear from people all the time about this. So, this awakening that's happening on our planet, it's so revolutionary, it's so evolutionary, it's so different that when it starts to come over somebody, this inner change, this inner shift, they don't understand it. They don't know what it is. And we can read about this on Quora all the time. So, yeah, so that's one part of loneliness that we don't hear talked about very often, is that we experience a loneliness by undergoing a real transformation within ourselves when we're going through an inner metamorphosis, and our old ideas and our old concepts just don't seem to fit anymore. They don't even seem to be a part of us. And when we try and explain that to our friends or loved ones, they totally don't get it. They think we've, gone completely crazy. And that can be a stigma in some places. People have written to me saying, I can't tell my parents, I can't tell my family about what I'm feeling, because if I do, they are going to lock me away. I will never be married. I won't be able to, go to school. I won't be able to, go out with my friends. I mean, I've heard these things over and over and over and over again. It's kind of shocking to me to hear these things. And such a feeling of rejection that you feel when you can't go to your family and friends with something that's happening to you on a level that's maybe a little different than what we normally understand. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to take up this topic, because this is something we have to be aware of and educate ourselves on, because it can happen to really young people. It can happen to young people who are, even 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, can start to have an awakening in themselves. And they really don't understand what's going on. It's tough, and it gets misdiagnosed. Of course, modern psychology and psychiatry and all these things, they'll try and fit it into one of the knowns. But I'm not so sure that the category spiritual awakening is yet fully recognized within those fields. And I hope that it will become more and more so as we go ahead. So loneliness can happen in many different ways. And having a spiritual awakening, or we can say an overhaul of our thinking, an overhaul of our heart, is one of the ways that we feel lonely. Now, I felt loneliness plenty of times in my life. Well, for one, and this will lead me into the next part of this, for one, I'm an only child. So I didn't have any brothers or sisters, and it was just me and my mom and my dad. And so that was somewhat of an advantage in a way, because I grew up being quite happy being by myself. I was used to that. And in a way, maybe I escaped all the sibling rivalries and things that other people go through. So it had its plus and minuses. But I think what I got used to was a feeling of aloneness. And as it said in that article, that we can feel alone and be very content. Sometimes people just don't want to be around other people, and you just want to be alone in your space. And you might read a book, or you might watch a movie, or kick back, or whatever it is you want to do, meditate, So there's this feeling of aloneness, which is not necessarily a negative, but it has similar characteristics to loneliness. Now, I'll share an interesting thing that's happened to me. Many, many times when I've gone to a large spiritual gathering, which we would call in Heartfulness, we call it a bandara or a gathering where there's thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, it seemed like inevitably on the third day, I would suddenly just feel completely detached from anybody and everything around me. And I would feel such a sense of aloneness, profound, profound aloneness. And it was a beautiful feeling. It was actually amazing. And on those days, I would pretty much try and stay to myself. And I would just like to take a walk and just walk around, the campus or wherever the gathering was happening, or go for a walk off campus and just allow myself to bask in that sense of aloneness. Because in that type of aloneness, in that spiritual aloneness, I feel that it's sort of a stage of surrender in a way. We reach a point where we recognize this feeling of aloneness, and yet, we're not an active participant, we're a witness of it. And I feel it's in those kind of states that we really open ourselves to merging with the divine state within the divine condition. Now, what does merging have to do with aloneness or loneliness? Okay. On the spiritual journey, it's such a dualistic process. There's me and there's you, and there's me and there's God, there's me and there's a guru, and there's me and there's it's always like that. So it's very relational. But on this spiritual journey, when we practice diligently and go into some of the deeper states of consciousness, we can have moments of mergence with the ultimate, where suddenly, you just feel alone. And it's a state unto itself. And that state really doesn't have an emotional quality to it. It's almost just like being the witness. Now, this also relates to our daily, weekly, monthly spiritual journey, traveling through the chakras. Again, for those of you who are maybe not practicing heartfulness, in heartfulness, we take up these spiritual centers within us. And if I sit back a little bit, you can kind of see there's these spiritual chakras within us, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, and then many other points all the way to the back of the head. And all of these points are taken up, and they need to be purified, cleansed. And when that happens, then we experience within ourselves a much more regulated state. We're much less influenced by past experiences or by emotional conditions. So we take up these points, and actually we could say the word, we travel through these points. We could say that. I don't know if that's quite accurate, but what I would say is, as the points become purified, okay, our consciousness shifts, our awareness shifts, and can exist then at a different point. And each of these spiritual centers exhibits a type of a quality. Okay, now here's what I want to say about this in relationship to our spiritual practice, is that when our consciousness is able to move from one point to another point, let's say from point 3 to point 4, for example, and we may or may not know that that's happened, but the way that we can know it is, we'll suddenly have an experience inside of us of feeling a sense of loss. And that can be interpreted by the mind as a feeling of loneliness. And where we always go to with our mind is, oh, what's happened to me? If I lost my condition, um, if I drop back, um, we always go to the guilt side, right? To understand what's happening. But when we go from one point to another, we can then experience a sense of aloneness and a sense of loss. And why we experience that loss is that we now have let go of a whole bundle of impressions that were tying us down. These impressions were influencing us in positive and negative ways. They're just influencing us. And when we can let go, then when we move to a new point, we feel a sense of loss because we've now moved into a place where it's new, but everything we had before, all of our baggage, we had to leave behind. We literally had to leave our bags behind in order to climb higher on the journey and get to the next point. So that's a sense of loss, which can also be interpreted as loneliness. So I think, overall, this idea, this feeling that can overcome us, it repeats in our life. It's almost cyclical. And when we go through these points, it will generally repeat at each one of these points. So there's many things in life that cause us to experience loneliness. All right, so how do we overcome that feeling? Well, as it said in that article, oftentimes even our friends and loved ones, we feel like they're not understanding us. And when we feel like we're not being understood, we then feel we're alone. Okay, so can meditation and cleaning help us to overcome loneliness? Well, as I just explained, that's not always true. It's not always true. Okay, in fact, it can cause us to feel aloneness and loneliness sometimes. This is why it's good to really talk it through and understand about our personal spiritual journey. But when can meditation profoundly help us to feel like we're never alone? What would that feel like? Would you like to feel that way? Like you are never alone and that you are always sitting in the lap of the divine or the ultimate or the master? So this too is a spiritual state that we can work towards in ourselves. And there's a name for this that helps us, and that's called constant remembrance. Now, when we meditate in heartfulness, in one meditation, we go through many stages. We first start out, we're, getting our bodies getting comfortable. We get a lot of thoughts. And then we start letting our mind rest on the heart. And we start letting go. But then we shift and we're able to go into a very deep state of meditation where we feel like we've completely lost awareness. That helps us to let go and to surrender in a way. Now, at the end of meditation, when we finally come out after we hear that's all, or if we're meditating on our own, we just feel that the meditation is concluded and we come out of meditation. Very often, we feel we're in a very different state. It does feel, I'm going to speak for myself, it feels like we're in a state of presence. There is a presence or something that's part of us that's with us. And that presence is actually always there. And you can call it the presence of the higher self. You can call it divine presence. You can call it master's presence. We have many names that we can give it. But this feeling of presence, at the end of the meditation, we feel so complete, so whole, and nothing is lacking, nothing is missing. And if we can train ourselves to rest on that feeling of presence, a day eventually dawns when we realize, oh, the presence has been with me all day. And it will be a surprise. You say, wow, I feel connected. I'm in remembrance. I feel like I'm still meditating. So that day comes through this practice of heartfulness when we do it with regularity and with sincerity. And then we have this beautiful thing that happens, and Babaji explains it in such a beautiful way. And Babaji is one of the heartfulness teachers, guides, masters. Babaji calls this a ubiquitous force within and around us. We feel that we are in a ubiquitous, all-encompassing, all-present force within and around us. When we are able to stay in that condition, you will not feel lonely because we feel like we are always sitting in the Master's lap. And while I'm on that topic, I think I want to give a tip about this. So last couple of years, I had many health things that happened to me that were really pretty severe things. I've talked about them before. But when I wrote to Daji about one of the things in particular that was happening to me, he wrote me back and he said that at bedtime, he said, I should go to bed with putting my head in Babaji's lap, thinking that I'm going to sleep in Babaji's lap. And so at night, I would take that up right after, I've said, I usually say some prayers and things. We know this if we're in heartfulness. But then after all of that, just as I'm going to sleep, I just have the thought that I'm going to bed and resting in Babaji's lap. These were the instructions. And I'll tell you, what a wonderful, beautiful feeling of presence and being held and being looked after, being so taken care of. And I woke up feeling that, just such a beautiful state of presence. So loneliness overall, in my opinion, happens because we have, I don't want to say lost, but because we've misplaced our connection with the ultimate, with the divine. And some people, on Quora, I read this a lot. It seems to take on a dry tone, that, all right, we're going to be in nothingness. Okay, there is states of nothingness. But what I would really like to say is overall my experience on this journey has, in any state of nothingness, there's also a state of such grace and feeling of well-being and of just being held. And I want to share an experience that I had during one of these health crises. And I shared it probably a few months back, but I'm going to share it again. I was having a severe reaction to a medication, extremely severe, and it put me in a deep state of loneliness, actually. Had a severe psychological and physical reaction. And when this got to its peak, I felt so bad one night, just really alone. And I knew I just had to connect. I just had to connect to the master inside. And so I went downstairs and I sat in my chair and I closed my eyes and I just surrendered. And I just, put out a call for help. And no sooner did I do that than suddenly I felt like I had shifted into a completely different dimension. And I awoke in this ocean of luminosity, a vast, infinite ocean of luminosity and lightness. It was just light, infinite. And I was completely aware. I was completely aware. And in that awareness, I thought to myself, oh, I must have a light body. See, a holdover from the physical. I was thinking, I must have a light body. So I'm trying to look and perceive, if I had a body, a light body. And I didn't. I was just light. I was only light. There was no container at all. I was just light. And I could feel Babaji's presence permeating this whole infinite ocean. And I felt he was somewhere in the distance, is all I can say it, to put it in relative terms, and that I was moving towards him. And Babaji told me, I heard him tell me something very specific to what I was going through. It's personal, so I don't want to relate that. But anyway, it was just very helpful. And so this was such a profound feeling of what I think where we're all connected. I think that we are all amazing, magnificent beings of light. We are. And for whatever reasons, we've gone through covering after covering after covering and become enmeshed, intertwined, intermingled with matter. And we've found out that we're now here in this physical form. And it's really the feeling of separation from our true abode that is the cause of loneliness. That's the root cause. And so the objective and why we take up this spiritual practice is to open up those channels, is to open up our awareness, is to make our awareness subtle again, subtle enough to perceive who we really are and to enjoy that and bask in that and to imbibe that condition. That's what we're doing on this spiritual journey. So, okay, with that, I think let's have our own experience of this. Let's experience exactly this, where we can join together in meditation and we can go within and feel a deep sense of unity and feel a sense of presence and a sense of completeness and wholeness. Let's do that. So if you're all ready. Okay. I request you to please sit comfortably. I already already feel that, that we're all connected. Let's take a slow, deep breath in and let it go. Let your shoulders drop down and relax. Let your arms relax and your palms and fingers. Just feel the weight of your arms in your lap. Bring your awareness to the area of your heart. Feel it softening. Feel a lightness in the heart. Now let's connect with that source of lightness, presence, that's already present in the heart. And feel that source is lovingly and gently carrying us home. That's all. Gently rest on the feeling of presence. And now let's have the sankalpa, or idea that this presence is our true nature and is always with us. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. So that brings us to our, it's not a conclusion, but to the next part of our evening or the next part of our day. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of this hour. We're feeling that beautiful presence and connection within. Neera, Padma, Maya, hi Maya, Prashant, hi, Sunil, Venkatesh, Santosh Kumar, Devareddy, Sahaja, Manuj, Anil, Ellie. Okay. It's been a real pleasure to be with you today. And as I always say at the end of this hour, that we stay with the heart. And I look forward to seeing you next week. All the best.